Welcome back to the channel, and I just kind of want to discuss some things with people because this is coming out around the time of the Theros pre-release, and usually when a new set comes out, you get people talking about things on social media around the new set. And one of the things that always comes up is how do you afford to keep building decks, especially if you play standard, right? You just invested a bunch of money in a deck, now new cards are coming out. How do I keep up with that? So I kind of wanted to share 5 basic rules that I've given to people that seem to have helped them out over the last few years, and maybe it'll help you out. So, first things first, I always tell people learn your deck style. And the reason that's important is there usually ends up being some number of cards you just don't need to worry about. For instance, I myself am very much an aggro player. If you give me a choice, I'm probably going to build some type of Gruul deck with red and green cards. So anything that doesn't fall into that space, I can at least set aside first. I'm going to look for the other cards that fit that type of deck because I probably already have other parts that go with it. Now, granted, maybe half the deck changes, maybe you only add in 4 or 5 cards from the latest set, but you'll already have a starting point and you already know what to target. That takes a lot of those other expensive cards kind of off the table for you to even have to worry about. And that's really, really important because I think that's where people get overwhelmed. It's easy to look at a new set and start thinking about, well, I need this card and this card's $20. And then what if this deck's really popular? And the reality is, you're just not going to ever need the majority of those cards. I mean, I can even tell you over the last 4 or 5 sets, several of the big cards I didn't need. I think I've played, of the most expensive cards, maybe 3 in decks. Not saying that's good or bad. It just, again, depends on your deck styles and what the cards are at the time. Maybe you do need those expensive cards for your deck, but then that means you could ignore the lower $3 to $5 cards and only target those whenever you get into your trading or anything else. Also, that kind of leads to the next point, which is know what your leverage is. Again, if you've been playing for a little while, you've collected some number of cards that you're not actually using. So use those to get the new things. Or again, just know what your deck type is so you even know what cards you need to worry about. There may be somebody else who doesn't want certain cards that you actually need. Or even know what format you're targeting, because that matters. There's some cards that come out that are not necessarily good for standard, but they're good for modern or for legacy or for commander. And if you go to a store where there's a lot of commander players, but you don't play commander, well, great. Go ahead and trade those to get the standard cards you need. Or if there's 1 or 2 cards that are big and modern, trade it to the modern player who's trying to update his deck without buying a bunch of new cards. They'll likely have something you need or something you can trade to get store credit toward whatever the next thing is that you want. So knowing your leverage is quite important. It seems kind of silly, but it's one of those things to really assess sometimes is, okay, once you open some packs, what can you use? What can you not use? What does somebody else need? What are even relevant at all to the format you play the most of? Any of those bits of information start helping you get a bit of clarity on your personal situation on what you actually need or can afford. This one is the one I think that is hardest for people to grasp at first. But I always tell people target going 2-2 or 3-1 in whatever F&M local tournament or whatever that you're playing. Usually because at that point, that's where the prize break is in most stores, and you can start picking up some amount of prizes. Yes, everybody wants to win. Yes, everybody wants to go 4-0 or 5-0 or whatever it is in the tournament you play in. But the reality is most people aren't. I don't even do that all the time. I mean, I've done it quite a few times and I've done well, but even I know that that's not a reality to know it's going to happen all the time. And with that also comes the idea that don't switch decks very often. Decide on what deck you're going to play. Try to play that for at least 3 weeks or 4 weeks. Get through a month in a season because you're chasing fewer cards and you'll learn the deck better. That's also going to result in you acquiring more prizes on a weekly basis. Then you have more leverage that you can trade for other things, and then your collection gets bigger, and then eventually you have more cards to get whatever you want when the next set comes out. Like, all of these things are connected. And going 2-2 and going 3-1 is still positive. I mean, it's still showing you are doing well. It still shows you understand your deck. You may still get your losses to randomness or who knows what, a bad matchup or pairing, but that's okay, right? The goal, yes, is to win, but not necessarily win or nothing. Like it's not a zero sum game. Sometimes just going 2-2 or 3-1 is going to allow you to get 3 or 4 packs or $10 store credit or whatever. And then that lets you build toward that next thing you need. And eventually, if you play the deck well and you get all the parts you want and the cards you want, then yes, maybe you are going 4-0 or 5-1 or top 8ing these events and getting the bigger prizes. And that's great. But that does kind of lead to our next point, which is playing events with proper value. And what I mean by this is don't think about it in general, what you hear a lot, the term EV. That's generally figuring out what is the largest possible prize per person if you average it out. That's not necessarily the best event for you. It's great. And now, if you're already an experienced player, then yes, you're trying to go to the event with the biggest EV, something that has some big cash prize or some multiple boxes of cards or whatever it is. Whereas if you're more true and honest with yourself, understand what a good, proper value is in an event for your skill level. For instance, if you are a mid-level player, or maybe you're a casual player trying to get into competitive play more, maybe you're not going to try to be in the MPL or anything, but you do at least want to be competitive when you go to your local store, then you don't necessarily need to be going to an event that has a $10 or $15 entry fee with only prizes to the top 3 or 4 places, even though they're huge prizes. You're better served going to an event with a $5 to $8 entry fee, but maybe every player gets a booster pack, or you have at 2 wins you get 3 packs, or maybe you're eligible for a drawing for one of the prize boosters or some amount of store credit, right? There's more you can get for your money just showing up. So your money's going to go further and you're going to get more things you walk away from those events with. And sometimes those events also don't draw the super competitive players because those players don't see it worth their time to show up to play for, say they go 4-0 in that event and beat all the casual and mid-level players, they get 4 packs or 5 packs. That's not necessarily worth their afternoon. But for the average player, showing up, going 2-2, 3-1, walking away with 3 or 4 packs and whatever other bonus things, that's a pretty good deal. And that's where you probably need to be. If you're one of those players that are struggling to get the right cards or making sure you can acquire everything you need, great. And if nothing else, those are the great events to go and test decks. So if you don't think your deck's the best version of whatever it is, then maybe you go play in one of those and you still get people who are trying and still bringing competitive decks, but maybe they're not the best versions or the best players. But it's at least a starting point to pick up from. And then finally, network and trade. This one seems very simple, but it does take a little bit of time because, one, you're going to end up having to find people that either also play the same format you do or play other decks that you don't necessarily play. This works for 2 reasons. One, and in both cases, it can actually help you get more proper testing and playing in, which is good to help you refine your decks and figure out what cards you need or what cards are problematic. Knowing those things actually shrinks down the number of cards you need to be chasing after at any given time, and that's awesome. It also gives you people who can help you pick up the cards you need, or even just borrow them, because that's a real thing. I think sometimes that goes undisclosed or undiscussed. So definitely network and trade. And now I can do a separate video on even what's the best way to trade when it comes to Magic. So there's a lot of ways that people value cards, and you have to kind of figure that out what works best for you and your situation. But overall, you definitely want to have a good, strong network. Those are people who will help you get the cards you need, trade with you, let you borrow. Or again, like I said, testing helps a lot. So you play with them during your downtime and understand what you need to be chasing or not. So to recap, know your deck style. Very important. That limits the number of cards you need to be chasing, and it'll put you kind of on rails a little bit to figure out what you need to be saving or not set to set. It keeps you, one of the things I didn't mention is that it does keep you from actually getting rid of too many cards that you might need in the future. For instance, again, using myself as an example. As a Gruul player, there's a chance I don't necessarily want to get rid of, like, Mantle of the Wolves out of the new Thero set, assuming I'm not playing them. I may want to hold on to them because there's a chance that I might use that card in the future. So I'll hold on to it. And then that'll save me time come the next set if for some reason that card's now good, I already have it. As opposed to trading it away or getting store credit to get something I don't necessarily need, or it's going to be short-lived and I'll just be moving on to the next card or the next deck. Also, don't let this mean that you can never have 2 or 3 decks, or you can never try something else. Once you've already established yourself and gotten the cards that you want, feel free to move on to the next deck and try the next thing. This is more a rule for the people who are struggling to build their first deck or second deck, or just don't have the resources to have multiple decks at one time. Again, knowing your leverage, understand what you have to trade, who needs it, even honestly, even where to get the best credit trade-ins. That's important too. Know what stores are looking for, know who has what on buy lists. Leverage that as best you can to get closer to the cards you want faster. Target going 2-2 and 3-1. Again, this isn't about trying to build a mediocre deck. It's trying about setting realistic expectations so that way you're still getting something for your money and getting those incremental steps to get to where you actually want to go. Then playing in events with proper value. Again, you got to be honest with yourself. Find the events that fit more to your skill level, that have appropriate prizes for what your expected records are. If you are trying to go to that 2-2, 3-1, then find a store that has possible prizes for everybody who enters, or pays down to 2-2 records, or maybe even does door prizes for, people that didn't get at least 3 wins, or whatever it is. Something that gives you an opportunity to get more prizes beyond just finishing in the top 3 or 4 places. And then network and trading. Find a group of people that you can trade with regularly, that can help you get cards, borrow cards, whatever the situation is, just to make sure you can get what you need faster. Because inevitably in every group, there's going to be people who are playing different decks and they all need different things. That's a way to save yourself time. You're not chasing around stuff online. You're not having to mail stuff off to vendors. It's just little things like that that can add up and really, really save you a whole lot of time. But yeah, overall, if you're an experienced player, you probably don't necessarily need these tips. You've built up a big enough collection that you can move from set to set freely and get whatever cards you want. However, these tips are going to be really good for people that are still struggling, starting out, trying to get into competitive play, have limited budgets, or in some way just trying to build that second, third deck and don't necessarily know the most cost-efficient way to do it. These ways allow you to do it without actually spending a ton of money and possibly even a ton of time in many cases, and still get to enjoy the game more. That's it. That's what we got today. See you next time. I want to say thanks for watching the video, and remember to please like, subscribe, and comment because that helps a bunch. And if you want to keep up with me and my shenanigans, always feel free to follow me on Twitch and on Twitter, where we're just as active. Thanks. See you next time.